why do you think the way you think, and why are you going to say the next thing you're going to say? Yeah. And is it, how much of it is biological? How much of it is your life experience? How much of it is information that's dancing in your head? How much of it is you interacting with me, the last thing that I've said to you?
Yeah, so I was on Sam Harris's podcast. We had a long conversation about this because he is very anti-free will. And I think that I disagree with him, but I don't care. I think it's kind of boring, to be honest.
Do you think it's boring, really?
I think it's boring because here's why I think it's boring. Because there's two questions. One question is, how does the world work? Mm-hmm. The other question is, what words should we attach to how the world works? Mm. And the first one is interesting. And the second one is kind of boring.
I see what you're saying.
And Sam and I agree on how the world works, mm-hmm. right? But I am what philosophers call a compatibilist when it comes to free will, which is I don't think that I have some ways of thinking my way into overcoming the laws of physics, right? Like I'm made of atoms, made of particles that obey the laws of physics. If I talk about myself as a large collection of atoms and particles obeying the laws of physics, then clearly there's no free will. There's just the solution to the equations, and sometimes the wave function branches, and there's now two of me, but that's whatever it is. There's no spark of consciousness that lets me overcome what the equations say is going to happen. But guess what? That's not a fruitful way to go through your life in terms of talking about human beings. When you meet somebody for the first time and you say, like, what do you do? Who are you? They don't give you a list of their atoms and say what every atom is doing and say, go ahead and solve Schrodinger's equation to figure out what's going to happen next, right? You tell a story. You say, like, you're a person, you grew up in a certain place, you have a certain job, stuff like that. You dramatically condense the information about who you are into a few salient points. And among those salient points are, I am a person who thinks and makes decisions. Every person in the world, no matter how anti-free will they are, talks about people as if they make decisions. And the reason they do is because that's how people are. That's the best way to talk about people. It's not like just a compromise. Like if you don't know the atoms and molecules in somebody's body and you're not infinitely computationally powerful so you can predict the future, then it's correct to talk about people as agents who make decisions. We call that free will. I call that free will. Most philosophers call it free will. If you don't want to call it free will, be my guest. I don't really know. It doesn't really matter to me.
I agree with what you're saying. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that really simplifies a very complex issue. When I looked at it, and I have had this conversation with Sam as well, I totally see his point, and I think he makes 100% sense. It's just there's no arguing with it. I really think it's very rational, that approach. But I also think that it's very much like what we were talking about earlier, that it's not necessarily just a 1 or a 0, that it's a combination of these things. Free will, there is some mechanism that chooses to do one thing versus another. There is some computation, there's calculation, there's debate, there's discussion, there's a thing inside of you, whatever it is, whatever that process is, that's causing you to, I mean, how many times have people stayed up all night going over and over and over a certain idea trying to find a rational conclusion?
Oh yeah, all the time.
What is that? Right. Well, what is that? Is that free will? Is that
This is where it actually becomes interesting to talk about the vocabulary we use, right?
Yes.
Because it becomes very, very hard to know where to attach the word I or you when you're talking about this. Like we tend to say, I made a decision. Okay, that's fine, right? I decided to have this can of pure caffeine that you put in front of me and drink it. I could have decided otherwise. So that's the question. Like, does it make sense to say I could have decided otherwise? And if you define yourself as the following list of atoms and particles in a certain configuration, then no. Then the laws of physics said that was going to happen. But I don't know what all that is. That's not a useful way of talking. So there's a whole nother way of talking that says, I'm a person and I kind of like coffee, but I already had a cup this morning. And, there's a chance, there's a probability, like you say, that I would drink this and a probability that I would not. And those are completely compatible, although they're different. The only way you get into trouble is if you mix up those two different ways of talking. If you say, like, I chose to have the coffee because my atoms were in a following configuration or something like that, right? That's like talking about us as humans and then switching vocabularies to talking about us as atoms, and that's where you get in trouble.
Yeah, it's a weird reductionist take on what it means to be a person that thinks.
Yeah. I think, if you say, like, there's no free will in your atoms, then I'm with you. I'm on board, but no one in the world goes through life that way.
Right.
For good reason, and they never will. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, and you could break that all the way down to creativity, right? Like when someone sits down and writes something, like where's all that
Right.
coming from? Is
Yeah,
that
so I
just
think again
determinism as well?
there is an interesting question about, how much we will ultimately be able to unpack and understand about that, right? Like right now, the brain is kind of just a mystery box to us. And there's so much we don't know about how people make decisions, how they remember things, how they come up with new ideas. So where it matters is how we treat people, right? Like the obvious case is responsibility, blame. Like if you think that a person makes choices, then you can assign responsibility to them for making the choices they made.
Yes.
That's what we do in the world. If someone chooses to rob a bank, we choose to put them in jail, right?
Yes.
And someone could come along and say, no one ever does this, but someone could come along and say, well, they're just a bunch of atoms obeying the laws of physics. How can you blame them, right? That would be dopey. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But what if you were Minority Report, right? What if you could put someone in an MRI, in a brain scanner, and say, yeah, you know what, tomorrow they're going to rob a bank. Do you arrest them? Is that enough, right? The fact that their brain was hooked up to violate the law in the future, is that enough to assign personal responsibility to them for that? Or do you do the opposite and say, well, it's going to happen no matter what. We can't really blame them.
Well, and also if you do catch this thought process is before the actual action takes place, isn't it possible to correct that thought process with education or some sort of awareness training or something where you could shift the consciousness and abruptly sort of disassemble determinism at its most problematic point?
Yeah, so there's a whole kind of interesting set of ideas that are very popular among philosophers right now, which is the question of moral luck.
Oh.
So if you're driving down the street and you're buzzed, you're drunk, right? Maybe you get home fine. Maybe someone jumps in front of your car and you run them over because you don't have the agility or the reflexes because you're drunk, right? So you're the same person. You went home, you're drunk, and you're driving home.
Right.
But depending on the outside world, you ran someone over and killed them or you didn't. But in the world, we blame the person who ran somebody over. We punish them much more severely than the person who got home safely, right? That's not their responsibility. They sort of got unlucky there in the world. So should we blame people who had the chance of doing it? No one knows the answer to these questions. These are tricky things. Like we're not very good, we human beings, at thinking about these probabilistic counterfactual questions.
Yeah, that's a good one. That is, yeah. Yeah, who are you then?
Yeah.
Are you lucky?
Oh, yeah, right. I mean, so much of what happens to us in life, we don't get responsibility for.
Sure.
Like,
we're interfacing with randomness every time we step out the door.
That's right. But can you treat people that way consistently? It's hard, right? It's tricky. I'm not giving the answer because I don't know. I mean, I think
right.
Yeah, this is tricky stuff. We're certainly not like if you lived in a world where you thought that what happened in the world was preordained, that there was all the great playing out as a master plan, or at the very least that there was some sort of karmic influence that made good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, then the world makes more sense, right? I don't believe any of that stuff, but at least then the world seems, if there's something random, you can attach a reason why it happened.
There seems to be something to karma in that when you do good things, you make people feel better, they feel about you better, and then they interface with you in a more positive way, and that sort of has this outgoing effect.
So that's not karma. That's just a psychologically smart thing to do. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think that you're right that and maybe this is just sort of a Western post-Enlightenment way of thinking, we tend to sort of think about immediate consequences for our actions, for better or for worse. And in the real world, sort of generally trying to be good can often pay back in good ways.
But the woo-woo thing is that we're putting out this good energy, and the good energy is coming back to us. And it's a fun way to look at things.
Yeah.
although there's no evidence that points to it.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I'm in a yoga class and my yoga instructor is talking about different energy flowing through different chakras or whatever, I don't care. Like it doesn't bother me. Like as long as it makes me, do
There's
the
not even a
exercises
little
in the
Sean
right
Carroll
way.
eye roll.
There's a little, but I'm not going to speak up. Let's put it that way.
Right, of course. You're not going to go, stop this class. You're teaching bullshit.
I would rather have that than if people want to come up with an excuse to be a good person, that's okay.
It's funny that yoga class is always the base. It's always where people go to talk about like where woo-woo comes from.
Yeah, it's there because I've had if you've done yoga, like there's a whole spectrum, right? Like there's teachers who are basically just physical therapists, and then there are people who are complete crazy hippies who think that, you have to think the right thoughts,
Yeah, but people are always searching for some understanding of really complex issues, and behavior is a very complex issue.
Sure.
Behavior and how you feel, like whether you feel good, whether you feel spiritually enriched, whether you feel positive about humanity, like all these things are like we're always trying to manipulate these states, whether it's through meditation, mindfulness training, trying to figure out a way to positively interface.
It's true, and it goes back to where we started talking about YouTube comments because, like I said, I do react badly to stupid YouTube comments.
Well, you're a human
right?
being.
Well, I'm a human being, but I think that the internet does magnify some of our bad tendencies, right? And I think that, among these, and so I totally include myself as a bad actor here in the sense that it's just so easy to be sarcastic and put people down and, disagree in sort of dismissive ways. And I don't think that's good. I would like to live in a world where people, including myself, even when we disagree with people, even when we disagree with people who are stupid and we're not trying to engage them or improve their lives, just, get on with our own lives rather than trying to have a snarky comeback. Like, I get that there's a purpose to snark and sarcasm and whatever, but it weighs you down, right? Like, this is why people complain about Twitter and social media. Like, it's so much psychic energy just gets sapped by reading all of these complaints on either side. There's no, political bias, right? Like, whatever your feelings are, someone else is making you feel down on the internet somewhere.